As we come together tonight, we are faced yet again with another tragedy that has taken place this week. And it seems like these are taking place far too often. Every week, it seems like we would have reason to pull out memorial candles and to mourn the loss and to grieve. Last Sunday, as many of us sat in churches around the country, 26 people lost their life and 20 others were injured when a gunman entered the church and shot up people who were there to pray, who were there to love, and there to support one another. Senseless acts of violence. The dead and injured range in age from 18 months old to 77 years old. And in one of the latest updates I saw today, there was an unborn child that lost their life along with their mother. It's happening way too much. 59 people lost their lives when a gunman, in another senseless act of violence in Las Vegas, opened fire on a crowd. Hundreds of people have lost their lives this year in mass shootings. Where does that bring us? Where does that leave us feeling? How does it leave us feeling? Maybe angry, mad, confused, frustrated, shedding tears for the lost, tears for our own grief, and as we struggle to understand what this all means and where it all leads. The unfortunate reality is that prayer and thoughts are simply not enough anymore. We can't simply just pray for the community out in Texas. We can't simply pray that this goes away. We must take action. Our prayers are absolutely important, and we must pray and petition God. And God does work in miraculous ways, but this needs to be set into motion. Our prayer needs to lead to action that is taken by each one of us, so that these acts of violence, these senseless tragedies, senseless murders and massacres cease to exist. When we get to the heart of the problem, regardless of which side of the aisle you stand on, whether it's for gun control or for gun rights, the simple fact of the matter is that we all must be open to hear, and we all must be open to have the conversation, and we must understand that at the very root of it all, it is a human problem. There's a human element that must be fixed. Yes, we can do several things from the legal system side that may help. We can argue that both ways. But we must get to the understanding that it is, at its core, a human issue. Our scripture reading tonight tells us that we are to love our enemies. In a week like this week, this scripture is probably tough to hear, because the last thing we want to do tonight is to love the perpetrator of this event, or of this massacre. The last thing we want to do is to love the perpetrator of the Las Vegas massacre. The last thing we want to do is love someone who took so many lives and carried out an act that could have been and was very preventable. It challenges us to our very core. It challenges us as we're on this roller coaster of emotional circumstances and emotional ride that is wreaking havoc on each one of us. Every person in America was impacted by last week. We don't have to know the individuals. We just know that it could have been any one of us. We know that their lives were taken, and taken senselessly. It impacts each one of us. So the last thing that we want to do is to love these people. But one of the many ways that our faith and that our life and that our humanity is challenged is by understanding God's grace and doing exactly what this scripture says. In a word, I'm saying, grow up. Love everyone. Love those who aren't lovable. If we can get to the core of that, then these senseless acts of violence would stop. If we could get to the core of loving one another unconditionally just as God has loved us, loving one another without expectation, without any preconceived notion, if we can get to the point where we truly love one another and love everyone. In this case, from what I understand from what we're getting through news outlets, is this individual went to this church because they had some grievance with relatives or in-laws. 26 people are now dead because we couldn't love one another. This person did not know a better way that they could love one another and that they could resolve whatever it was in a better, more healthy way, in a way that would not take 26 lives. We don't know and may never know the exact causes of so many more of these massacres, and especially the most recent one with Las Vegas. But again, if we simply loved one another, I'm telling you to love your enemies. Let them bring out the best in you and not the worst. When someone gives you a hard time, respond with energies of prayer, for then you are working out your true selves, your God-created self. This is what God does. God gives God's best. If all you do is love the lovable, do you expect a reward? If all you do is greet the person who greets you, do you think you are right in doing so? We have to love one another. We have to love one another for all of who we are, as we've been talking about here for so long. We have to see each other as reflections of God. We have to understand each other as being created in the image of God. And then love one another right where we are, regardless of the circumstances. God instructs us to love unconditionally and to love especially those who are hard to love. Not just loving the lovable, but loving those who are hard to love. We had a situation here at the church some months ago. There was a person that was doing some things around the building. Someone I presume to have been homeless, or at least that's the way they presented themselves. And while they were here, they had access to the back storage area, and another church member happened to come up and saw them carrying some of our sound equipment that's stored in the back out in an attempt to steal it. The intent was that they were going to take it and sell it and be able to use it to purchase whatever their needs were. In that moment, that church member stopped and engaged that person in conversation to find out what they were doing. They loved them right in the midst of where they were at. A lot of us would look and say, "You're stealing from the church. You're not worthy for me to talk to you because you're doing something so vile, so horrible, so inhumane, something that we certainly cannot condone. And that person had the conversation with them to understand where they were at, what they were doing, and the equipment was placed back where it was supposed to be. And that member went a step further and even attempted to make sure that they had some money to get along. How many ways can that impact somebody? You imagine if you're that person, you're in such a position where you have no means or you see no other way, and you're literally stealing from the church so that you can get whatever it is you needed or wanted. Someone from the church finds it or catches you, and not only doesn't call the police and have you arrested, they talk with you, make sure that your needs are met, and give you money. How many of us, and you ain't got to raise your hand, but how many of us could have been in that place where we could have done that? Or would have our humanness have kicked in and said, can't do this? In that moment, showing love in the face of adversity, in the face of what we would seem as something so cruel and so evil. In loving in the face of that, we showed that person a better way. We showed that person that God's love extends even to them, even in the midst of them doing something that we would deem so horrible. That God loved them right there in that moment, and God placed that individual there to be present for that person, to allow them to understand and to receive that love in a new way. My hope and my prayer is that it transformed that individual. My hope and my prayer is that it makes things a bit different for them going forward. But more importantly, it sent a profound message to me, because I don't know that I would have been in a place where I could have done what that person did, what that saint did. I don't know that I would have been able to have done that. It challenged me to my core, not because I was disturbed by the act, but because I was so inspired by the act, and I was troubled by the fact that I might not have been able to have done that had I been in that situation. That I would have allowed my humanness to have gotten in the way of God's holiness and God's divine appointment. Because I'm very clear with the timing of that event and that person walking up and catching those circumstances going on, that was a divine appointment in that moment. Not because the church needed the equipment. I don't even know if it's stuff that we would have recognized that would have been, I have no idea. I don't know if it was anything we're currently using. And we may not have recognized that it was ever even stolen. But there was a divine appointment because that person that was stealing needed a divine intervention to know that somebody loved them. And to hear that on the street or hear that any other way hadn't worked in the past, but to hear it in that moment, I know within my heart and within my soul it changed that person forever. I haven't seen the person since then. I didn't even see them right after that act. But I know that changed that person. I know that it impacted the person that was appointed by God to be here to catch that act. And I know that it impacted me. We have to love each other right where we are. We have to love one another unconditionally. We have to love those who are unlovable. Our love can't extend to those of us just sitting around us. It has to go out to the least and the lost. It has to go out to the Oak City Outreach Center. It has to go out to the prisons. It has to go out to where folks are perpetrating acts of violence or where they're out doing whatever it is they're doing. We have to love them in their space, right where they are, unconditionally. That's how God loved us. We get caught up gauging whether your sin or my sin's greater, or what you're doing is worse than what I did. The simple fact is that because of God's grace and God's mercy, we're here today. Regardless of where we came from, regardless of what we've done, God's grace and God's mercy allowed us to be here today. When Jesus died on the cross, Jesus died on the cross for all of our sin, to erase all of that. We don't have that debt to pay. What we can do now is go out and share that love and share that message and let others know, so that they can come to know that love in that way. And all we can do is plant the seed and allow it to be watered and to nurtured. And it's up to them then to accept that love. And once they do, it's up to them to carry it out and share it with everyone else. We have to love one another right where we are. We have to accept God's grace. And when we accept God's grace, we have to grow up to be able to love even those we don't deem lovable. Amen.